Hegemonic stability theory. Within realism, we have the idea that it is necessary to have an intellectual structure that talks about the economy, about institutions, looks at the state, and thinks about change. Thus, Gilpin brings the idea of hegemonic cycles to try to understand the dynamics of the international system at that time. What happens when we have a power distribution that emerges victorious, as for example the US after the Second World War? The first concern of a force like the US is to provide stability to that system. In a highly competitive international system, even if you are the most powerful country, if you don't pay the price for some stability, the constant conflict produced by competitiveness will end up eroding your power. In this way, it is necessary to build a hegemonic order. Who raises the order is the hegemon. It is the one that emerges stronger in the distribution of power. It is he who makes a kind of initial sacrifice. It bears the short-term costs of hegemony, of stabilizing order and building up institutions to reap the long-term benefits of stability. We have to think about a power circle and the role of all the elements that critics said were not considered in Walt's thinking. Every time this power is projected, when we have a distribution of power that is born, such as the end of the Second World War, we have a choice on the part of the hegemonic force. The hegemonic force has to choose between short-term preponderance and long-term stability. If it doesn't build institutions to provide long-term stability, it runs the risk of attrition along the way. If it sets out to seek to preserve this strength, it will have to pay the price for it, creating institutions and organizing order. Who needs to bear the responsibility for the cost of preserving order is the hegemon. It's not the system. We have a process in which order is not born spontaneously, but as a product of the project of power raised by a hegemonic force. This reflects the vision and interest of this hegemonic force. The institutions that are built benefit other actors, but in a way that reflects the working dynamics of the hegemonic force. Institutions are fundamental because they provide the stability and respond to the prevailing distribution of power in the system. They work because they reflect a power project and only work as long as the system's distribution of power is coherent with the power project erected by the hegemonic force and through these institutions. In this way, these institutions serve a purpose. As soon as the balance of forces changes, the usefulness of these institutions will be questioned. This whole process triggers a dynamic because institutions allow the system to have stability. But who pays the cost of prosperity are the forces that maintain the system. The important thing about this figure is to understand the cyclical character of this process. We have an order in which this dilemma of paying for costs emerges. But within this, other countries take advantage of the situation to grow at the expense of the hegemon. As the process is dynamic, in the end we have a rebalancing of power. The forces that had no strength in the system take advantage of the order that the hegemon created and become relevant forces. Between the second and third movement, we have a set of choices that relate to these forces that emerge in the system. The choice is, to what extent it is better for me to take advantage of this order and to what extent I feel confident to create my own order. Once a country becomes a relevant force in the system, continuing to take a free ride is convenient to some extent. The rules are designed to benefit the interest of the hegemon. Thus, in the second phase, the country must make a choice between continuing to enjoy the benefits of order at the expense of the hegemon or to redesign the system with a new set of rules. Fourth phase is what happens from that moment on. When it wants to become a new hegemon, it can either fail or go to war with the hegemonic force. So we have a cycle. There is a change in the system. It goes from the establishment of hegemony to the growth of defiance, to the challenge of defiance, and to a new moment marked by a new structure, whether it is marked by war or not. So with Morgenthau, we have the idea that power is not fixed. It depends on the scenario we are analyzing. High politics is fundamentally the realm of war and diplomacy. This is important because we have several dimensions in the social world and international politics must be seen as a separate sphere. The choices that mark international politics are decisions that have consequences for the survival of the political unit itself in the long run. These are the choices of high politics. When we make decisions in the sphere of war and diplomacy, we have choices where the integrity of the survival of the political unit we are part of is at stake. Even with other important choices with economic and cultural consequences, it's no use making a choice that allows you to prosper economically if one of the consequences is allowing your opponents to subjugate you militarily. Waltz. Waltz doesn't raise the question of power. He replaces it with the notion of capability. For him, to understand the nature of the structure, we do not need to talk about the particularities of the different dynamics of power. Waltz's idea of refraining from talking about power is no longer seen as acceptable. Therefore, power can no longer consider the idea that economic transformations are not as crucial as military ones. In the world of the 60s and 70s, looking at economic transformations as if they were less relevant does not reflect reality. In this way, Gilpin works with the idea of the combination of three elements: political, economic, and military. These three variables will combine in different scenarios, and the strategy of one configuration is not suitable for another. That's all. Thanks for watching.